Good morning. We're at Zayin Amud Beis. We are learning Le'ilei Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain. Her neshama should have an aliyah, as we're learning the entire Masechta in her memory. Okay, so we're at the two dots on Zayin Amud Beis, and still, as I think we spoke about the other day, still some a little bit challenging Gemaras, stuff which is difficult and not so relevant to our day-to-day living, but learning a little bit more about what Carmelists are, what Shus Rabbim are, and when we get to about Daf Yud, we're going to kind of change gears a little bit, and I think it'll be much smoother sailing. I think the Gemara does this on purpose to try to separate, those who have the grit to make it. So it's kind of like the challenge. But once you make it past the opening 10 plots, I think we'll have much smoother sailing. Okay, let's go. So Gufa, we are quoting a brisa that a memra, or rather a teaching that we saw earlier on. Amrav Gidol, Amrav Chia, Bar Yosef, Amarav. Beit bias, a house, she'ein toho asar, which does not have 10 tvachim, which is not 10 tvachim high. I know this sounds insane and weird. Like, how could you have a house that is, shorter than this? It seems like very, very, very strange. The truth is, back in the day, you look at some of these old structures and things were built in all these funny shapes. So it wasn't as crazy as it sounds. So you have a house which is not 10 tvachim high. Why is that significant? Because to be a Rishus HaYachid, you need to be 10 tvachim high. So if it's too small, let's say it's not 10 tvachim high, or to make things simple, you have like a little Tykes house, whatever. It's sitting in a public domain. It's not going to be a private domain because it's not 10 tvachim high. Okay, ukruyo mashlimo lasara. And however, it is 10 tvachim high with the roof. So you have a roof of this 10 tefach, this little structure. Inside, it's not 10 tvachim high, and therefore on the inside, it is not a Rishus HaYachid, as we'll see, but it does have a roof, which makes it 10. So al gago, if you're able to walk on top of it, okay, mutter l'taltal bekulo, you could carry throughout the entire on the rooftop of this entire structure. Why? Because once it's 10 tefachim high, it's like a 10 tefachim mound, and the rule is you're allowed to carry on a 10 tefach mound because it's a full-fledged Rishus HaYachid, right? So 10 tefachim high, it is a full-fledged Rishus HaYachid, you could carry on top of it. Bisocho, inside this house, where again, if it just is 10 tefachim high with the roof, then that means inside, take the roof out, it's going to be, 9 tefachim or so. It's not going to be 10 tefachim. Ein metaltlin limbo ela b'dalet amos. You can't carry within it, okay? You can't carry within it. It's not a Rishus HaYachid. Amar Abaye. Abaye, though, qualifies this statement and says, v'mchakak bo dalid al dalid. If, let's say, a person within this structure, okay, I think by putting the image of a little Tykes house, maybe ruin things for you. So let's forget a little Tykes house. You have a proper, a root, like a house, a little house. What?
Like a shed.
Yeah, perfect. And a person goes ahead, and there's not 10 tefachim inside of it. So, but a person wants to make it a Rishus HaYachid. So what do? What they could do is they could dig a 4 tefach by 4 tefach hole, 4 by 4 width and length, 1 tefach deep, or whatever, and deep enough that now from within that little space, it now reaches 10 tefachim. So imagine a Rishus HaYachid, let's just make things simple. It's as big as this room even, okay? And this whole room, though, is only 9 tefachim of height, right? So it's not a Rishus HaYachid, but I want to carry in this room. So what do? I dig down 4 by 4, okay? And now from the floor of that 4 by 4 hole till the roof, it now is 10 tvachim, okay? Even though it doesn't go as far as the walls over here, but as long as there's a 4 by 4 little space within that structure, y'all with me? Right? So from the floor of that 4 by 4 place, now it's 4 by 4 and 10 tvachim high. So what happens? You are allowed to carry throughout the entire thing. My taima, what's the reason behind this? It is now called the crevices of Rishus HaYachid, v'chure Rishus HaYachid k'Rishus HaYachid dami, and the crevices of the private domain are like the private domain. So what does this mean over here? So what we're being introduced to is the following principle, and that is that until now we've talked about the fact that a private domain has to have a certain dimensions. Okay, so a proper private domain has, it's 4 by 4 in its width and it's 10 tefachim high. Okay, but let's say you have it within the walls of your house. Now keep in mind, back in the day, storage was a little bit different than it is in our days. And within the walls of the house that you have, there's a hole. Okay, so just imagine your own house. You have a hole, right? They have stones, they have cement. The cement kind of wears away. There are places like, think of the kotel, right? So think of the kotel, they're holes. And let's say you keep your, your spices in some of those holes, right? Wait a second, it doesn't have the dimensions of a private domain. How do we treat it? So the halacha is, the crevice that is coming out of the private domain is like the private domain. And therefore, everyone would agree that if you're in your home and there's a hole, there's a hole and you stick something in the hole from within your home, that's still part of the private domain, even though that hole doesn't really have the dimensions. It's kind of an extension of, which kind of logical. The extension, what Abaye is coming to teach us, which is much more novel, is saying that, let's say I have a house this big, okay, just that the ceiling is much lower, 9 tefachim, and then I go and I dig this little hole, this 4x4 hole, and now it's 10 tefachim from the floor all the way up, then everything outside that 4x4 area, all the way to the walls, is also called the holes of the Rishus Yachid. It's all considered like the crevices. It's no different than in the walls of my home that I could stick things in because it's part of the private domain. Similarly, once I have a 10 tefach space, anywhere between that 10 tefach space and the walls is considered part of the private domain. Make sense? The Ran explains that the reason for this is because what makes a private domain private is because people can't get inside. And that's one thing, so it's blocked. And you have the ability to have 10 tefachim there. So once you have both those criteria, then even though it's kind of a strange example where you have this large room over here and you have this 10 tefach space, which is only pretty small, it's only 4x4, nonetheless, the entire thing is called the crevices of the private domain. Okay? Now we're going to go and talk about crevices on the flip side. Everyone, as we'll see, agrees that crevices within your home, right? If your home has like walls of the kotel and you stick things in there, that is a private domain. The question is, what about on the outside? If you're standing in the public domain, now people would also, and this comes up in which Masechta? I think Baba Kama. Also Baba Basra. But it talks about the fact that people, Baba Kama spoke about the fact that people stick things in the walls. Yeah, there we go. Head shaking. Okay, good. Okay, we have by the way, tonight for the students, going to be a huge test. No, just kidding. Okay, so there are walls in the Rishus Harabim, right? And let's say people, while they're walking through the Rishus Harabim, kind of stick things sometimes to store things in the holes of the public domain. What is the status of the hole adjacent to the public domain? How do we treat it? Do we treat it like an extension of the public domain? Or do we say, no, it's come something separate, right? From the private domain to the holes adjacent to the private domain, everyone is agreeing that's the private domain. What about the flip side? Do I treat the holes in public domain like it's the public domain? That's the question we're now going to deal with, okay? The Itmar, we learned, the holes in the private domain, the crevices in the private domain are like the private domain. When it comes to the crevices of the Rishus Harabim, here it is a debate. Abaye Omer Rishus Harabim Damu. Abaye says it is like the Rishus Harabim, meaning it's no different. If I were to go ahead and move something from the private, for, let's say 4 amos in the public domain, a space of 4 amos, and it lands on the floor of Rishus Harabim, I'm certainly chayav. If I were to land in a crevice of Rishus Harabim, it's like the Rishus Harabim. He says it's no different. The crevices, the holes. If I have a wall and I stick something in a wall of the coming off the Rishus Harabim, that is exactly like the Rishus Harabim. Rav Omer lav Rishus Harabim damu. He says it is not like the Rishus Harabim. That is the debate. Okay. Amrle Rav Abaye. Now they're each are gonna try to prove their point. Rava, who said that it is not like Rishus Harabim, says to Abaye, Lididcha, according to you, you hold that the crevices of the Rishus Harabim is like the Rishus Harabim. Maishna mehadechi asar Rav Dimi amar Rav Yochanan. Why is this different than the teaching that Rav Dimi taught us from Rav Yochanan? Lo nitzrucha el keren zavis hasmucha l'Rishus Harabim. Right? If you recall, we had a case of a Carmelis that was you had houses that were adjacent to Rishus Harabim, right? Think of downtown Baltimore, where you have a row of houses, right? Row houses, and you have one house that's set back, right? The area in front of that house that's set back, what did we call that area? Thank you. We called it a Carmelis, right? That was the classic example of a Carmelis. It was not Rishus Harabim. Asks Rava to Abaye, according to you, if a crevice attached to the public domain, adjacent to the public domain, is called the public domain, then certainly that area, that space, which is adjacent to the Rishus Harabim, right? Again, you have row houses and one house is pulled back. The area in front of that house should be called what? Rishus Harabim. Meaning, according to you who say that the crevice, right? If you hold a crevice, if you're walking Rishus Harabim and you stick something in the little hole off of the Rishus Harabim, that's called Chor Rishus Harabim, the crevices of Rishus Harabim, which are like the Rishus Harabim. So certainly, if I have a whole space which is adjacent to Rishus Harabim, that should certainly be called Rishus Harabim. And yet, everyone agrees that is called a Carmelis, which is not a full-fledged Rishus Harabim. Right? What's going on over here? How could it be? A major space is called a Carmelis. A hole is called adjacent to Rishus Harabim, called Rishus Harabim.
I think that's the thing, is a major space and a hole. Those are two different things.
Okay, I hear your answer. The Gemara is going to give a different answer. I hear what you're saying. So the Gemara says, Rishus Harabim. Why isn't it like Rishus Harabim? So he says a different answer. He says, Hasam lo nicha tashmishte, hacha nicha tashmishte. Literally, this means there it's not easy usage. Here it's easy usage. What does the Gemara mean by that? What the Gemara means, or what Abaye is responding, is as follows. He's saying, The whole of Rosh Hashanah, okay, you have to put yourself in the ancient medieval world, pre-medieval world mindset. Holes of Rosh Hashanah were like, this was storage. You're walking down the street, it was like totally normal to be sticking things in walls. Just like we put like notes in the walls of the kotza. Like that's what people did. In your home, you were sticking things in walls. In public domain, you're sticking things in walls. It was just normal. And it's like just normal, just be sticking things in. And therefore, Abaye says that the crevices adjacent to Rosh Hashanah, that's like, it's normal. It's normal usage. It's like easy. I'm walking and I just stick it in. But if I'm walking down the public domain and then there's one house that kind of goes like this and goes, oh, it's off the camera. Okay, it goes off the, it's not straight. I have to walk like out of my way, right? Then that is not it's out of my way. It's inconvenience. You can't. It's not like simply like part of Rosh Hashanah. Granted, it's easy walk. But at the end of the day, it's not like normal and smooth usage. The whole thing is that it's out of the way, and therefore, no, that is a karmelis. If it's like part of the proper normal usage, just stick my hands up, then it's going to be part of Rosh Hashanah. But if it's something I have to go out of my way, that's already beyond Rosh Hashanah. It's not going to be. Okay, and that's how Abaye answers the question. Okay, now we're going to ask another question on this principle. It's not. We have a Mishnah. Hazorek dalad amos bekosel. If a person throws something 4 amos and it reaches a wall. Okay, meaning a person standing in Rosh Hashanah and they throw something 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah. What's the halacha? If you throw something 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah, what's the halacha? Chayav, right? So I'm standing in the public, imagine this is the public domain, and I throw something 8 feet, okay? I take my phone and I throw it 8 feet, so it just moved from point A to point B over 8 feet, I am chayav, okay? But then the Gemara says, Bikosa, let's say I do it against a wall. Lemala me'asara, if it reaches above 10 tfachim, kizorik ba'avir. It's like I threw something in the air, right? We saw earlier that the public domain halachically ends at 10 tvachim. It is no longer, it's not considered the public domain above 10 tvachim, okay? Lemata me'asar tvachim, kizark ba'aretz. If I throw it less than 10 tvachim, then it's like I'm throwing something on the ground. Ve'havina ba, and the Gemara asked, we had a question. It was asked when we saw this Mishnah, my kizark ba'aretz. Why do you say that when someone throws something against a wall, under 10 tvachim, it's like you threw it on the ground? V'alei nach. It never rested, right? The Gemara is saying, if I throw something against a wall, what do you need for it to be what do you need to be chayiv in halacha for traveling for moving an item on Shabbos? It has to start somewhere and has to end somewhere. If I throw something against a wall, it bounces back. It doesn't end at that wall. What are you talking about? That it's like it hit the ground. It didn't. It clearly bounced back. The Gemara says, no. We're talking about a plump fig, a sticky item. I throw a thing of slime. I threw it and it's stuck against the wall. Okay, fine. That's how the Gemara answered it. The Gemara said basically this whole example of throwing something against a wall, I'm throwing something sticky. And when I throw it above 10 tvachim, pater. When I throw it below 10 tvachim, I'm chayav, it sticks on the wall. Okay? So now the Gemara asks, and if you hold like Abaye does, that the crevices of Rosh Hashanah are like Rosh Hashanah, why does the Gemara have to give the example? Why does it have to say we're talking about a plump fig and it's sticking against the wall? Lukma b'tzror. Just give a regular case. I'm throwing a little rock, v'chefetz, or an item, v'udanach bechor, and it lands in a hole. In other words, the Gemara has to give this bizarre example, this very strange example. Oh, the guy's throwing plump, sticky figs that stick against a wall. Okay, I mean, why not just talk about a normal item? And here's how to do it. Say that you threw an item and there's a hole in the wall and it fell in the hole of the wall. Okay, good aim. It fell in the hole in the wall, and that's the case we're talking about. Why doesn't it say that case? So it must be meaning if you hold that the crevices of Rosh Hashanah adjacent to the Rosh Hashanah are like the Rosh Hashanah, and I throw a pebble from one place of Rosh Hashanah 8 feet away, dalad amos, 4 amos, and it lands in a crevice, what would the halacha be? I'd be chayiv. It's part of the Rosh Hashanah. If you hold that the crevices adjacent to Rosh Hashanah are like the Rosh Hashanah, then you'd be chayiv in such a case. Why doesn't it say that case? So Rav is saying it must be because the crevices of Rosh Hashanah are not like Rosh Hashanah. He's trying to prove his point, right? Why did the Gemara have to come up with this case of a sticky item? It would have been much easier with something, a little pebble or something that just went into a little hole. Elamai, it must be that the crevice of Rosh Hashanah is not like Rosh Hashanah, right? So it's a question on Abaye holds that the crevices adjacent to Rosh Hashanah are like the Rosh Hashanah. With me? Yeah? Okay. So the Gemara says 2 possible answers. Zimnim Mishani La, sometimes he answered, Shani Tzur V'chefetz de Mahadar V'asi. Okay, that he sometimes would answer that a pebble and an item. Yeah, sometimes you could get. You ever play? I don't know these games of like I don't know the amusement parks where you have to like throw something into the basket. The little that ball into the basket. Like okay, I imagine someone here knows exactly how to flip it, but it's hard, right? What normally happens? You throw it into the basket. Even if you nail in the basket, what happens? It bounces back. So Gemara says, yeah, it's true. Really, it could have been that you could have given the case of the pebble throwing it into the crevice, and it would have been like the public domain. It's just that practically most people throw something in, even if you make it into the crevice, it's going to bounce back. And therefore, we prefer to give the example of a plump fig, which is sticky, because that's easier for everyone. Just throw it, and that's a simpler case. Zimnim nishanila. Alternatively, sometimes you would answer, because of leis bechor, we're talking about a wall that does not have crevices. In other words, basically saying, yeah, in a wall with crevices, that would have been a good answer. We're talking about a wall that doesn't have crevices. Now, the Gemara doesn't have to prove. Most walls do have crevices in the ancient world. Our walls don't have crevices. Back in the day, most walls do have crevices. We have to prove now that this wall that we're talking about in this example doesn't have a crevice. How do you see so? Mimai. How do you know that this wall does not have a crevice? Midiktani Reisha, because in the first case in this Mishnah, it said, Zarak lamala me'asar tvachim. The Mishnah said that if I throw above 10 tvachim, kizorik ba'avir. It's like I'm throwing in the air, right? Again, let's just review. The Mishnah told us two cases. One case it said, if I throw on the wall above 10 tvachim, it's like I'm throwing in the air. If I throw below 10 tvachim, it's like I'm throwing on the ground, right? Now, whenever you have two cases in a Mishnah, we're going to assume that it's talking about the same scenario. We can't say in one case talking about one type of wall and one case the other. So in the first case, it said if I throw against a wall above 10 tvachim, it's like I'm throwing in the air. Now the Gemara asks, and if you like a Rava want to say that we're talking about a wall that has a hole in it, crevices, why is it like I threw it in the air? Hanach bechor. It's like I'm throwing it. It lands it in a crevice. Okay, and if it lands in a crevice, then I should be chayav. It's a full-fledged rishus yachid. Meaning, if this wall has a crevice in it and it lands there, so why are you saying it's a makom petur, that it's a place of exemption? If I threw it above 10 tvachim and it lands it in the crevice, it's going to actually be a full-fledged rishus yachid at that point because it's landing in a proper domain. If I'm throwing it in a crevice, rishus yachid, what do we say? Goes lamala ad l'rakia, goes up to the heavens.
Yeah, but it's not a place that's does that have to be 4 by 4?
As Ross asked, maybe we're talking about maybe the wall does not have 4 by 4. Your question, meaning the Gemara's assumption was that it's a wall that has at least 4 tvachim wide, which by the way is far more common. Our walls are quite thin. That's because we have insulation and blah blah blah. But back in the day, they didn't have all those things, and therefore it was typical for walls to be quite thick. But the Gemara is open into the possibility, like you're saying, maybe this wall doesn't have 4 by 4, and therefore it wouldn't be Rosh Yachid, and that would be an easy answer.
Even if you throw it and it lands in the hole above 10 tvachim, if it's not the right size,
then it wouldn't be a Rishus Yachid, and therefore it would still be Pater, right? And that's Ross's question, right? So Gemara says, no, we have a comment on this Mishnah, which says that if a person threw something above 10 tvachim, and it lands in a crevice, this comes to the debate between Rameir and the Rabbanan. Okay, Rameir Savar chokin lahashlim, Rabbanan Sovre ein chokin lahashlim. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: there is this machlokes in Eruvin about the following. Let's say you have this notion of chokin lahashlim. Do you dig out in order to complete? What's this talking about? So there's a law about a mezuzah. Okay, so if you have in a home, what necessitates a mezuzah? A doorway that is 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim wide. Okay, sometimes you have like a little trap door in your house. So I have a trap door to a crawl space. It's too small. I'm not chayav mezuzah in such a case because it's too small. Okay, fine. Let's say you have a case where it's 10 tvachim high, 4 tvachim wide, but when it gets to the top of the 10 tvachim, it starts arching, right? So it starts arching. How do you count that? Do you say, well, since the center it's 10 tvachim, but it's not 4 tvachim across because the arch kind of gets in the way of the 4 tvachim across, right? right? How do you treat that? This comes out, most of the times most of our arches in our house, again, 10 tefachim is pretty short. So usually in our homes, we do, even if you have an arch, it's usually going to be above, that you will have a space of 10 high and 4 by 4 down. But let's just say you have a case where it's just 10 tefachim, 4 by 4, and the arches get in the way of that. So Rameir says, chokikin lahashlim. He says, you visualize, there's like this, he basically says, you kind of imagine in your mind that it's chopped away, and since it's part of the doorway, you kind of erase the arches over there, and it's as if there is a full 4 by 4 and 10 high. Rabbanan say no. There's arches there. They block there's not 10 tefachim of height across the whole thing. Therefore, you don't do such a thing. So Rameir basically has this principle that whenever there's a little bit of space, you kind of envision the full halachic space, even if it's not there. Okay, it's like a fictional reality, a halachic reality, as some would call it. It's basically like it's not really there, but we kind of see it since there's a little bit of space. We kind of imagine the full space is there. Rameir would say you need a mezuzah there, and the Rabbanan say no, it's blocked off. You don't need a mezuzah there. Okay, that same machlokus would apply in our case, because in our case, what would you have? You have a little hole in the wall, right? And basically, what would happen is Rameir would hold that since there's a little bit of a hole, chokin lahashlim, right? Basically, we'd say even though the hole is not 4 tefachim wide, but we would chokin lahashlim. We would like see it halachically as if the whole wall is empty and the whole hole it goes all the way across the 4 tefachim, and it would be a full-fledged rishus yachid. Right? So a mayor would hold whenever you have a little hole, it's going to be like there's 4 tefachim wide, okay? And the Rabbanan would say not. Now, our Mishnah over here says it's not like a rishus yachid, right? It's not like a rishus yachid, and if there was a hole there, the Gemara is saying over here, then even if there, let me take a step back. The Gemara is assuming there certainly is 4 tefachim of wall. The question is the whole 4 tefachim? I'm sorry, I think I mispresented it, right? So everyone's going to agree a wall in the ancient world is certainly 4 tefachim. No one's going to make a wall less than 4 tefachim wide. The question is, the Gemara is saying, maybe it doesn't have 4 tefachim of width of hole. And the Gemara says, doesn't matter. Because once it falls into a hole of any size, Rameir would say, chokikin lahashlim, and therefore it would be a full-fledged rishus yachid. And the fact that the Gemara doesn't say it's a full-fledged rishus yachid, in the case of throwing it above 10 tefachim in a hole, must be, the fact that it doesn't say that it's rishus yachid, must be that there is no hole in the reisha, right? And therefore, it must be, even in the seifa, there is no hole, right? With that, I'm going to repeat that one more time. Right? Again, the Gemara over here is trying to say that the wall, to answer for Abaye, the Gemara is trying to say that the wall does not have a hole in it. Okay, and he's saying, and therefore it doesn't have a hole in it. Don't ask me why we didn't give that case of the pebble going into the wall. How does he know that the wall doesn't have a hole in it? Because if it would have a hole in it, in the first case, in the case of going into the private domain, then if it did have even a smallest hole, and a person threw the rock into that little hole, then Rameir would say that's a full-fledged private domain. Because he would say, yeah, it's just a small hole. But we envision the hole extending all the way 4 tefachim, in which case you would be treating it as rishus yachid, and you'd be chayiv. And yet, what does the Mishnah say in the Reisha? If I throw, in the first part of the Mishnah, if I throw the item above 10 tefachim, I'm complete patur. Why? According to Rameir, it would be a rishus yachid because it would be a small hole, but we'd envision it as a 4 tefach wide hole, and you'd be chayiv. We don't say that. It must be. Why don't we say that? Because there is no hole. If there's no hole in the Reisha, there's no hole in the Seifa, and therefore your question on Rav Rav's question on Abai is saying, hey, why don't you say you threw the small rock and it got into the hole? Because there is no hole. And therefore, bottom line is, let's just quickly summarize, everyone agrees the crevice on the side of a private domain is considered like a private domain. A hole on the side of Rishus Rabbim, one opinion says it's like Rishus Rabbim, one opinion says it's not like Rishus Rabbim. One more Gemara, very, very, very quickly. Yeah.
If you look, we don't even paskin like the little hay is next to the ankle kilahaji like the Rabbanan. So Rameir's consideration isn't even what we go by. Yeah. So it's the fact that we have to consider that and use it as a proof doesn't quite work.
Yeah, but the Gemara is good question. The Gemara is assuming that Rameir, since Rameir is many stam mishnayos are Rameir, the Gemara is going to assume that our Mishnah would also follow like Rameir. Okay. That's what we're assuming. That even if we don't pass the way. Okay, the truth is we're out of time. Okay, have a wonderful day. We'll pick up tomorrow. Take care.